I didn't expect to be so interested in what Patrick had to say, and I found myself reconsidering and questioning what I'd been taught beforehand at school.
In my school, there's sometimes whole hours that we spend in a day talking about climate change, and just learning that it isn't actually what I know it or knew it was is kind of surprising.
Good morning, everyone. It's late in the afternoon here, but that's because we're on opposite sides of the planet.
What was the biggest motive towards starting Greenpeace?
It was a very dangerous time in the world, particularly Russia, which was then known as the Soviet Union, and the United States were in what was called the Cold War, which was an escalation of nuclear weapons to see who could have the most and who could kill each other first. And then it was also the time of the emerging consciousness of the environment. The word environment was now being used, and you've got to remember this is over 50 years ago, was now being used around the world. The word ecology had not even been seen in print, or nobody even had heard the word ecology when I was young like you are now. But of course, ecology came to be a big part of the thinking and policy in the world today.
What did you do in Greenpeace exactly?
We decided to sail a boat from Vancouver in Canada to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, where the United States was testing hydrogen bombs. And we were doing that as a protest against the threat of nuclear war. And we actually helped stop the testing of hydrogen bombs. And here is the crew of the Greenpeace boat that went to the Aleutian Islands to stop the nuclear tests. And it's hard to imagine that a somewhat ragtag looking bunch like that, I'm under the P there, where it says Greenpeace, we succeeded in getting huge public opinion. People were marching in the streets by the tens of thousands because we were sailing a boat in a dangerous mission across the Pacific Ocean to stop those nuclear tests. And then we went on to protest against the French atmospheric nuclear testing at Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia, where your country, Australia, and in particularly New Zealand, was very involved in that because France was still blowing atomic and hydrogen bombs off in the atmosphere then, sending radiation all around the Southern Hemisphere. And so the countries in the Southern Hemisphere, like yours, were concerned about that. And we sent boats there too, 2 years in a row, and stopped them from testing in the atmosphere. They continued to test underground for many years after that, but at least they weren't spewing radiation into the atmosphere anymore. And then the biggest campaign of all was to save the whales. In the early 1970s, Russia and Japan in particular were killing 30,000 large whales per year in the oceans, mainly in the Pacific and the Antarctic. And we set out in a boat to stop them by putting ourselves in front of the harpoons. This is me. I'm driving a little rubber boat out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in front of the harpoon to protect the whale, which is in front of the boat there. And then here to save the baby seals on the ice floes off Newfoundland on eastern Canada. I sat on this baby seal and got arrested. This picture was in over 3,000 newspapers the next morning in 1976. So that's a little fingernail sketch of the excitement of the Greenpeace years. It was an amazing time. We were all volunteers at the beginning with noble intentions, and gradually Greenpeace grew into a very large organization of which I was one of the 5 international directors.
My question is, what is your knowledge and thoughts on the Rainbow Warrior in New Zealand that was blown up by France?
In some ways, that was the most important moment when the French commandos were sent by the President of France, with his permission, to blow up our boat in New Zealand. I was woken up at midnight by a phone call from the bunk rooms we were staying in to say that the Rainbow Warrior had been bombed and that the photographer was missing. So quickly, the other directors and I who had come there, 4 of us, went down to the dock and saw that the Rainbow Warrior had been sunk. The cameraman had gone down below to get his camera gear when the second bomb went off, and that killed him. So there was an actual murder occurred by the French, and it was a very awakening moment for all of us. No one had ever tried to bomb us before or to kill us before. We didn't know who did it. There was no clue, except the next morning they found a Zodiac inflatable boat across the other side of the harbor that said "Made in France" on it. So we figured that was a clue. And of course it was. I think it also brought us a great deal of notoriety and gave us a lot of power. So one lesson to learn in life is that often when people attack you and other people recognize that you're being unfairly attacked, it gives you strength, not them. So you have to stand up to people who come after you when you know you're right about something. It's just a little lesson in life, I think.
Why did you leave Greenpeace?
For me, that's a bit of a sad question because I wish I never had to. But as Greenpeace evolved, and this happens with many organizations who start out with really good intentions, even as volunteers, and then we became so successful that people were sending us scads of money. By the time I left, we were making over $100 million a year from people giving us money so we would continue to do our work. But what that does is it makes fundraising more important. And all of a sudden, paying the salaries of the nearly 1,000 people who are now working for you, in a way, Greenpeace could never stop because that was what made their living, was continuing to campaign. And before you know it, they started adopting positions on environmental issues that were not science-based any longer. Where we had started as an organization called Greenpeace, green for environment and peace for humanity, for people to live in peace. The peace sort of got forgotten partway through. And all of a sudden, Greenpeace and much of the rest of the environmental movement were portraying humans as the enemies of the earth, the enemies of nature, sort of as if we were like the only evil species. And like even cockroaches and rats are better than us kind of thing. And that just doesn't fit with me. We are part of nature. We are one of the species that has evolved on the earth over this last 3 billion years. And we're a very interesting one, and we do a lot of good things, and we have a lot of good intentions. Greenpeace and the environmental movement sort of took this position that the human species was the enemy of all nature, the enemy of the earth. And the first lesson of ecology is that we're all part of one system. We're all part of life. We're not separate from life. We didn't come from Mars. We are part of the life that evolved on this planet. And that's how we should see it, as one issue to deal with and balance the different factors. And mostly the way those three factors are explained is environment issues, social issues, and economic issues. Those have to be balanced. It's not a question of environment against the economy or environment against social activity. It's needing to balance all three of them, because without all three of them, we couldn't be here anyways. It's more of an approach of trying to facilitate a solution rather than to name an enemy. I believe we should look for solutions rather than looking for enemies. And so I had to leave because that's the way it was going. And in a way, it's turned into a racket peddling junk science, as I put it succinctly today. So I'm glad I left.
The video you just watched is for a new education platform called True Arrow Academy of Critical Thinking, or TACT for short. TACT will be an alternative education resource platform that's non-woke and non-indoctrinating, with each lesson being a potential turning point in a young learner's understanding on a range of important topics. TACT will evolve into many hundreds of animations and filmed lessons written, run, and influenced by an exceptional mix of academic heavyweights teaching against the grain, with lessons encouraging open discussion, critical thinking, and debate. TACT's duty of care is to arm and shield youth against modern, subversive, mainstream education. Supporters will be the lifeblood of TACT. If you would like to support this project, let's build this together at givesendgo.com/TACT. Thank you so much.